Hello, everybody!
Doing something in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, Dylan, because today we revisit one of our favorite authors in fantasy, one we have dedicated countless episodes to, all these different character studies, all these different variations on who would win, and all these different theory episodes, and all these book discussion episodes, and that must be Joe Abercrombie.
Who else, right?
Who else?
Love Joe Abercrombie's work. Most people probably realize that about us by now.
Yeah.
And super excited to get into the heroes because, Charles, this is your first read of the heroes. I've been waiting for a very long time to finally have this conversation
about the heroes before.
Yes.
This is like, the excitement is palpable because
Yes.
we love to talk, obviously, and a lot of these, every Joe Abercrombie book up till now we have discussed in depth for years since recording these episodes, and now here we are, new ground. So excited to get into it. This is all part of our read through of the entire First Law universe, working our way through the Age of Madness in anticipation of the Wisdom of Crowds coming out in September of this year. And we are in the standalones right now. And this is the second of 3 standalones. And it's such a fascinating book, The Heroes. And we'll go through it, through the whole plot of it and get more in depth about it. But I just have to say at the top that this book is just fascinating. It's a fascinating book, and Joe Abercrombie lives up to his name in this one for sure. But also, just
his name being
Lord
Joe Abercrombie or Lord Grimdark,
both. And it's very much in his voice and his style. But the way that this book treats the world building and like a standalone versus a trilogy, it's fascinating stuff. And I just love, I never saw Abercrombie as a world builder because I've only read 3 of the books, right? A trilogy. So I saw it as, okay, that's the story. And now I'm seeing the story get bigger and bigger and change and actually age and turn into something else. And it's just so fascinating to watch that progression. And it's like you said at the beginning, like way back when you pitched the series, Dylan, like Joe Abercrombie's growing as an author and growing in his voice as he writes through these. And I think this is the first time I've really started to see evidence in this transition in his voice.
Yeah, that's really well said, Charles. I think for me, as someone who's read through all of Joe Abercrombie's published works so far, I feel that it's such a critical part of how I think about the Joe Abercrombie experience, is his growth as an author, and the fact that this series has been continuing and just fleshing out not just the world, but also the characters and their relationships. And then even as time passes, what happens when characters we know age and move on. And so it's awesome to see you getting to experience that. And I think a lot of folks who've only read the original First Law trilogy or stuff like that, something that they stand to gain a lot from, like you're gaining right now, Charles, is like seeing where Joe Abercrombie takes his characters and his world as it continues to move on and age and time passes. But let me give my spoiler warning so we can get into what we're actually talking about.
Let's do it.
So, in this book discussion episode, we'll be having a no-holds-barred conversation about the heroes, as the heroes is in the First Law universe and follows events that have happened in previous books, despite being a standalone. We will also not hold back in terms of spoilers for the original First Law trilogy. That would be The Blade itself, Before They Are Hanged, Last Argument of Kings. We won't hold back anything from Best Served Cold, though I don't imagine we'll get into much about that. But still, we won't hold back from spoilers. Sure. A little bit. With the one character in particular.
Yes.
And then from there, we also, of course, will not hold back spoilers from The Heroes, the book that we're discussing here. So if you haven't read those books yet and you don't want to have anything spoiled, then now is a good time to maybe check out those books because they're all amazing, but also to turn this down in your headphones so you don't get anything spoiled for you that you don't want to hear.
Well said, Dylan. And we were talking about characters changing and getting older throughout these works, and that brings me right to like Black Dow, Lord Marshall Croy, the Dog Man. They're all here, but they're in different roles than they were in the First Law trilogy, and we hadn't really seen them in Best Served Cold. So to come back to them now is super fascinating, and Black Dow fascinates me so much. I love him. He's such a great character, and in this, it's funny to see a man who in the First Law trilogy was pretty much like always on the frontier, always on the run, like rugged camping lifestyle, now burdened with responsibility and age and at the highest level as a king of the North. It's so funny to watch him kind of tolerate politics and tolerate bureaucracy in some way and try and make compromises and things like this when he had so much freedom when he was following Three Trees around doing whatever he wanted, and now he's got the chain and knowing that that's where he came from and reading about him now having that context is super fascinating and almost kind of funny and endearing in a way.
In a way, I mean, it's interesting with Black Dow. The way I read it this time around is like Black Dow is losing it. So he's just having these moments of exploding on people and yelling and like actually seeming really insecure. In a Black Dow way. A Black Dow way of being insecure is like reminding everyone how he's the hardest name in the North and such a strong fighter and all these kind of things. But he's just having these outbursts constantly where he's freaking out. And we even get later, I mean, we're going no holds barred here, so I know you want to get through the plot, but like these moments of vulnerability from Black Dow where he'll be like, he was like talking to Craw, and Craw's like, I'm trying to get out of this biz. Like, I'm going to go be a carpenter. And Black Dow is like, it was pots for me. Like, I was going to, I had soft hands, and it's like, hey, could you imagine me, soft hands, that whole thing. And it's just these moments where it's so Joe Abercrombie, where it's like, even the hardest name in arguably, besides maybe the Bloody Nine or whatever, but Black Dow was always the person that throughout the First Law trilogy, and even in this book, it's like, there's no one worse a person than Black Dow. He's so hard and dark and all these things. And even he has so much insecurity, especially when he gets put in that position of power. And I wish... part of the shame is that we never get a Black Dow point of view, but we get kind of close to it when Kerndon Craw gets to be his second, and we get to see some of these vulnerabilities from Dow. But Dow's such an incredible character. You're so right, Charles.
It seems very deliberate that Joe Abercrombie did not give us a POV into Black Dow, and you have to, like, I asked myself, why are we not getting a Black Dow POV? Why are we getting a Craw POV? And I think the whole point is we're supposed to be kind of not sure what's going on in Black Dow's head. I think that uncertainty and like being caught by surprise by this, it was pottery for me. We could have read this whole thing of like, things were much simpler when I was a child making pottery versus like having this whole thing where he's the hardest man in the North and he's challenging people. And then he's like, it was pottery. And you're like, what? This guy was like holding that for this his whole life. And he never shared that with anybody. it's a calculated move, and Dylan, we've already talked about this, but one of the things I want to have a full discussion on is Joe Abercrombie's use of POV just across all of the first law.
You're saying a separate episode at some point?
Yeah, separate episode. Yeah. Because it's just brilliant.
Yeah, okay,
and
we'll do that.
I think a lot of that would be referenced here, and yes, it's the characters he chooses to give POVs, and then, I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about the chapter casualties. Everyone that's read The Heroes knows what we're talking about there, where it's deliberate use of POV of a bunch of different characters, but also his restraint in who he doesn't give POVs to and when he doesn't give them. Like, he also doesn't give a POV to Shivers, and Shivers was a character we intimately got.
Not in this book.
Right. But this is someone we intimately got to know in Best Served Cold. And now we're seeing how other people see him, and he's like this hard guy, like dead, glazed over eyes, like cold, will do anything. And we know that he's struggled quite a bit. So it's just so fascinating to see when we get these characters and when we don't get them. And Black Dow is one of my favorites because, like you said, he's the hardest guy there is. The things he's done is unspeakable, especially in the First Law trilogy, and the things he would say were like horrifying. But, you know, at the end of the First Law, he was the one that was like, Logan, you're a worse man than me because at least I'm honest about how bad I am. And then he continues to have that, like, really, like, deep perspective on things. It's really interesting. So, throughout the series, Black Dow, truly incredible. And not a guy I would want to be in the same room with ever, but a guy I really enjoy reading about.
That's many Joe Abercrombie characters.
Yes.
Charles,
and then
probably
Dylan,
most of them.
I don't know if you remember from the end of our Best Served Cold episode, but I said Joe Abercrombie writes a book and calls it The Heroes.
Yes.
And I was like, there's no way this man is talking about like a knight in shining armor hero. So it was no surprise to me. I was like chuckling when I found out in the beginning that The Heroes is a location. It is a place. It's these stones that are scattered around this hill, and it's such a Joe Abercrombie move. I loved it. It's one of these ideas that here's the heroes for you. It's this location, and it's all these people trying to defend it over 3 days, and it's a book about heroism as well, and almost like one of the quotes, like one of the things we wrote down was the grimly ironic deconstruction of heroes.
So, yeah, and Charles, it's definitely a place, and that's definitely very Abercrombie and, of course, deliberate and purposeful, and you're picking up all that. I also want to say, and as you're noting with the grimly ironic deconstruction thing, and grimly ironic is very Abercrombian as well. But yeah, it's a theme, and actually in the back of my copy of Best Served Cold, there's this interview with Joe Abercrombie, and they said, "What can you tell us about your next novel?" Meaning The Heroes.
Yeah.
And Abercrombie said, "It's called The Heroes and is a story of one battle for control of the North, most of the book taking place in the same location and over the course of 3 days. It follows 6 characters as they variously take part in the fighting or try to avoid it as their paths cross and interweave throughout the course of the battle." He goes through some of the characters, and he says, "The Heroes is a fantasy war story that attempts to investigate the whole notion of heroism." He says, "My 5-second pitch is Lord of the Rings meets A Bridge Too Far." But I want to focus on that sentence. The Heroes is a fantasy war story that attempts to investigate the whole notion of heroism. And I think that's kind of what you see throughout this book is all these characters who are all the heroes of their own story. Or grappling with the idea that they don't think they are meeting the qualities of what the hero of their own story would actually do, almost because they have this idea in their heads of the knight in shining armor that you were referencing as what a storybook hero is supposed to be. And none of them are quite living up to that, even when they do really great feats.
Exactly.
In their heads, they aren't anything like what a hero is supposed to be. And there's some decent, because part of when you were saying this, like, well, the heroes, like, it's like, I have a feeling Abercrombie's going to come at this in a unique way, and he does. But I guess part of it is knowing, like, it's not that, like, no one ever does good things. Not that you're implying that.
No.
It's that, like, we all are trying our best, but telling ourselves a story about
every POV character in this book is an exploration on a certain aspect of heroism, and that just is another layer to this story, right? There's almost the futility of it by naming this place where all this seemingly senseless waste of violence is taking place and naming that the heroes. And then there's the characters that are involved in it and how heroism affects them and their moments of heroism or their moments of of cowardice or whatever. And we can get into all of these characters, but it's obviously more than, oh, it's called The Heroes and I named it after a place, haha. It's like, no, it actually is an introspective on heroism in war. And I like to think that Best Served Cold is almost this idea of futility of revenge. And then we have The Heroes, which is almost like this, maybe not futility of war, but it's about war. And a lot of Abercrombie's violence and like horrifying moments have this element of like, I don't know if wastefulness is the right word to them, but it almost seems kind of senseless and wasteful in like the actions that happen. And I think the idea of like, it's a battle over a tiny little hill and so many people die and you end up pretty much where you were, just a lot more people are dead. And it's like, wow, that's really intense. And it explores that in a bunch of different perspectives. And to me, I love how contained this book is in terms of its setting and its plot, and then how
time
and how
like a few days.
Depth it is in terms of its introspection and its themes. So to me, that's a difficult thing to do, especially in fantasy where we're used to everything just being big, big, big. And to really focus in, I mean, he has 6 POV characters. It's not small by any means, and he has way more than that if you count like the casualties at Cap Chapter and all that. So it's big where it counts, and his economy of POVs versus setting versus time, it comes together so well.
Well said, Charles. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be able to get into a lot more about the specific character and stuff. I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to get into the plot here, Charles. I see this epic episode note plot summary you have.
Right.
I'm going to talk more. I just don't want to hold you back from
I appreciate
your
that.
Here,
and there's so much to talk about here. Let's get to some of these other moments here, and that's like the introduction of Calder, which Prince Calder, Bethod's younger son. This is an interesting POV for sure, because in the First Law, we only know him from the outside, and he was the one that just ruthlessly had Forley the weakest, decapitated, and he's the son of Bethod, so he's not looked at in a favorable light, right? It's a very unsympathetic view. But now in The Heroes, we're getting a very sympathetic portrayal of Calder because we're getting to know his story, right? And he's aging, he has a wife and she's pregnant, and he's
and he cares about her.
He's genuinely cares about her, and he's trying to hold on to the family that he has, and then also he's kind of being fed to the wolves by Black Dow. Black Dow's trying to get him killed by putting him in battle, is the vibe that you're getting, and that's kind of what Calder's suspecting. And to me, like, we were talking about the use of POV, and in this case, to see Calder portrayed sympathetically was really fascinating to me.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting thought, Charles. I was wondering what you'd think of Calder, because it might not surprise folks that I am a huge Calder fan, because he's all... Yeah, I thought you might be thinking that while reading him, because he's all smirks and charisma and telling people exactly what he needs to tell to kind of set the roots to get what he wants out of the world and all this kind of stuff. And I always love those roguish type characters. He's not a classic rogue in the sense of a lot of classic rogues have these kind of like dagger in the night assassin type things going for them, and Calder's kind of a self-proclaimed coward. He has some brave moments, but he's like I just love his whole persona, and you describe it as a sympathetic portrayal, and I think it is, because we see him grappling with trying to be a good person, but the whole time he really beats himself up over the Forley the weakest situation.
Yeah, that was
he thinks he's like, he thinks he's irredeemable for it, and so does the Dogman, as we get that moment later where the Dogman like shoots a snot rocket into his hand.
The Dogman hates him, and we hated him too when we
for good reason
in the Blade itself.
For sure. And I think that it's just it's very interesting and very Abercrombie to be like, Calder's kind of he's just one of those lovable jerks. And I love Calder. We'll get more into like the stuff he does and how fun a lot of it is. But I also appreciate that underlying all the smirks is this genuine care for his wife, and she's pregnant with their child, and it all means so much to him. And he feels things really deeply.
Yeah,
he just tells himself that he doesn't. Yeah. And he's such a great character. Yeah. One of my favorite point of views in all of Abercrombie's work.
I would agree. I think of all of the POVs in this book, the heroes, his story arc is my favorite. I think it's the most like poetic. I think it's the most like storybook. Like, man, he delivers at the end. You know, I just there was something about. I was like, man, Abercrombie can really deliver on that classic like story, and on a nice theme, like when he wants to. Like he's more than capable of it, and this very clever ending for Calder where he finds a way to save his brother by making him king and then acting through him is a moment that I really enjoy, because I was like, oh, is Abercrombie gonna make him kill his own brother? Like, I don't know how I feel about that.
And he would, he would if he thought it was
he's more
best.
Than capable of it. Yes. Exactly.
I'm saying Abercrombie.
Yeah, Abercrombie's more than capable of
Abercrombie's capable of pulling a move like that. Yes. But he didn't. Yeah, he went for redemption for Calder, which is
I thought
awesome.
Was
it's
fantastic.
Part of,
No, it's what put Calder at the top of the POV characters for this book for me. He was conniving the whole time, and he may have spectacularly failed in it. It was really only saved by Shivers at the end there, and Bias too.
And Bias,
like he may have at the end not had much consequence, but he was able to do this one little thing and save his brother, which speaks a lot. And we've talked about Abercrombie's hopefulness despite being Lord Grimdark, and these ideas of doing good when you can.
Yes.
And the way Calder's the story ends in this is some of the most hopeful writing I've ever read from Abercrombie.
Yeah, I agree, and that's part of why I've been talking a lot about the narrative. Like, Joe Abercrombie is moving away from the strict grimdark label with his later works. Is if he was all out grimdark, then Calder would do the worst thing he possibly could have done, and this character who's been telling himself that he's irredeemable would prove to himself he truly is irredeemable or whatever. But he kind of ends it with that moment of like, okay, I can't take away that I killed Forley the weakest, but I can do better this time. And it's like, we talked some in the original First Law discussions way back at this point, where it was like, there's that quote where Logan was like, doing better next time. That's what life is. And we kind of, we gave Logan some crap about like, when is next time ever actually going to come, Logan?
Yeah.
And I feel like Calder, who isn't going around telling people doing better next time, blah, 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 he's just like actually learning from his mistakes and trying to do better next time, and he really did do it by the end here, and I'm proud of Calder. I really relate.
Yeah, I'm proud
in
of
some
Calder
ways
as well.
to Calder.
Yeah,
I haven't done anything as bad as Calder did, but I definitely feel that like this kind of idea of the Calder type character who is looking to, be a good person when he can be. Right. And sometimes, someone like that can tell themselves stories about how they're not doing that, even when they're trying. And I think that's so much of what happens throughout the heroes with most of these characters to some degree.
I agree.
Yeah, so
no, it's
good for Calder.
Good for Calder, and it brings up, at a certain point in the story after, Calder goes out into the world to fight in the heroes, we have another character from First Law that shows up in this that I was so happy to see, because I think he's like the embodiment of First Law, and I just, after finishing Last Argument of Kings, you just wanted to know more. I was like, I need more now that we know what's going on. And that is Baez. Baez is back, and now that we know exactly who he is, it recontextualizes what he's doing in this book, right? And he lives up to it. He has, he's here to help Lord Marshall Croy, and he's got his, his right-hand man, and they're basically there to test what is cannons. But it was funny to hear him like, what should we call it? Fire engines? No. it's these moments of humor that are in this book that almost kind of break the fourth wall a little bit, which is kind of funny. And this idea of fire engines is one of those moments, and the invention of the sandwich is another one. But I love seeing Baez.
Big moments.
And this moment of Baez. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wrote down some quotes, because once a Baez interaction started happening, I was like, yep, this is all going down. Like, these notes have... So I wrote down some quotes.
Let's hear it.
And, yeah, their exchanges. One is the dog man and him, and they start talking about Logan Nine Fingers, which is so cool to see that conversation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of like, Baez like, oh, he's a good man type thing. And then dog man says, a man anyway. Some good and some bad in him like most. As for much miss, depends on who you ask, don't it? And Baez says, true, you have to be realistic about these things. And that's a beautiful little exchange with those two. And it's fun because you get this kind of like, where's the dog man at around Logan after we talked about how he got left at the end of the First Law trilogy with this like, what now? Like, what am I supposed to think about this guy? And then an even more interesting exchange, I think, was the one with Gorst.
Yes.
Where Gorst says, I was fairly beaten, talking about the bout with Jazal at the end of the contest, where obviously we all know Baez cheated on Jazal's behalf, but no one got caught because it was magic. So Gorst says, I was fairly beaten. And Baez says, you were beaten anyway, which is all that really counts, eh? And there's just something beautiful. So Gorst, we'll talk more about Gorst, but obviously he's on this just like this arc of thinking he's the worst person to ever exist, beating himself up constantly. He just thinks of himself as this murderer, and he's just stuck in the past and all this kind of stuff. And Gorst is in dire straits, horrible mental state.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something kind of, like, for some reason I almost want to say beautiful, but that's not the right word. It's like
it's very Abercrombie where you want to say beautiful, but it's
so
not. I don't want to
twistedly beautiful.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Like twistedly poetic in an Abercrombie way, where it's like we sit in Gorst's head with the ramifications of Baez's actions toward Gorst and what that did to his life. Gorst's entire life was sent spiraling. It would have been so much better if Baez didn't use him as a tiny pawn in his scheme. And not only do we have to sit in that, we have to sit with Baez, who's just this big bully stomping on anthills, being like, oh, well, like, whatever, like, you lost, like, taking little shots at Gorst, and Gorst doesn't even know what's going on. It's like, what is this exchange? Baez is such a bully. Yes. He's such a bully.
Big time bully.
And, yeah, he ruined Gorst's life.
And this opens the door to talking about Gorst. This is another example of, like, It ties in Best Served Cold in an interesting way, and it also gives more perspective to what happened in the First Law. So it's an interesting piece that Abercrombie decided to put at the front of the story here, and this idea of heroism, right? Where we go back to this theme of being heroic, where Gorst, in his actions on the battlefield, he's a hero, right? Because he fought back the line and he, turned the charge back. And really all he was doing was basically trying to like suicide through combat. And he also just loves to kill people is like another thing you've come out. So these are not things that you would give to a hero. And the fact that under the guise of war, by doing these things, he's able to become a hero. He kind of muses on that. He's like, if I just did this anywhere else, I would be sentenced to die, a criminal. But because I'm doing it in wartime, I'm a hero. And he's the first one to be cynical about it too. So this idea of heroism, it's like only a maniac would be capable of doing these things, of like charging in and killing a bunch of people. Right. It's like no mentally stable person would do those things. And that's kind of exemplified through Gorst. It's like, what is heroism really? You have to be kind of unhinged to do some of these acts of heroism in wartime.
Yeah. I have a quote from Gorst that backs that up that I think he says to Jallenhorn, which is, heroes are quickly, he says in that high voice, if you listen to that wonderful Stephen Pacey audiobook narrate, but I'm just reading it in my voice. Pacey's commitment in that audiobook is incredible.
Yeah.
But Gorst says, heroes are quickly fashioned from the basest materials, quickly fashioned and quickly replaced. If I qualify, they are worthless. And it's like, because Gorst sees what goes on inside his head and everyone keeps telling him, you're a hero, look at all these things you did. And he's like, you don't want any part of what's going on in here. If this is what a hero is, that's horrible.
Right.
That you do not want to be one.
Right. And it's further exemplified by like what he says and then his inner monologue, which is almost like Glocta-like, but he'll be talking to like Fenrir, for example, and he'll be like, very good lady. And then inside he's like, why don't you give me a smooch, babe? It's just much more crass stuff than that.
I think he says some worse things that you were avoiding to keep our clean rating.
Yeah, so this is not someone that exemplifies a hero, but everyone likes to think of him that way, and it's super interesting to get that juxtaposition of what other people think of him versus through his actions, and then the just unhealthy mental state he was in to commit those actions. It is super fascinating and very Abercrombian.
Yeah, well said, Charles. I'm sure we'll get even more Gorst talk as we
much
going.
Gorst talk, but there's more that happens in the story. It's 3 days. There's surprise attacks, counterattacks, peace talks. We get all of this, but the story is almost like a backdrop to some of these characters, and
I agree.
I'm just trying to get to my next character here because there's so many good ones, and one that I think we need to talk about maybe a little more quickly is in these moments of battle throughout the first and second day, we get a lot of this character, Corporal Tunney. Corporal Tunney, he gets some of the best.
A man of your own heart. I feel like you love Corporal Tunney, Charles.
I'm a fan. I loved his little quips and the way his philosophy on war. I said at the beginning, I feel like this book is about the futility of war, and I think it's Corporal Tunney's view on war that I just find absolutely delightful. There's one quote that I pulled that I just love, and he goes, "Wars are hard enough work without people fighting in the middle of them."
It's so Tunney. Yeah. I love Tunney. He's got these amazing witticisms. He's got this like incredible. I don't know. In some ways, he's just wiser than anyone else in this story, right? Because it's like he's the only one who sees war for how pointless it is and sees soldiering for how it is like it makes no sense, and how all these mess ups and stuff come from people who are already not necessarily the most competent, aren't in their positions necessarily because they're good at it, are in their positions for weird reasons, like Jallenhorn, who's a general because he was a drinking buddy with Jazal back in the day. It's like he's seeing all of this for what it is, and he's so disillusioned with it. And then, we also get these weird moments with him where he's like, gets moments of courage and bravery, whatever the original Tunney that was in him that wanted to sign up has. I don't know. I love Tunney as a character. He's a little more, I don't know how to say it, like, he's more muted than some of these other characters because he doesn't get these big moments, right?
But what I like again, we were talking about the juxtaposition of Gorst, where it's like his internal struggles and his external acts of heroism. Corporal Tunney has his own, where he's highly capable, very smart, and very talented, but he uses all of his advantages to avoid responsibility at all costs. Like, he's very clever, and he does that to remain at the corporal level, to be in the back, or it's like no one wants him leading any charges, and he's like, great, because now I get to like sit back here and relax, and he's kind of teaching his wisdoms to his soldiers. He's like, guys, you don't want to be doing that. They're just gonna get you killed. And it's like, the general's here, let's get out of here before this comes back on us. There's no reason a general would come in here unless they were gonna have us do something bad. It's kind of like, I'm sure if Corporal Tunney saw Gandalf enter the gates, he'd be like, oh no, we gotta go now. If Gandalf's here, we're in trouble. So he has those moments of like ingenuity and cleverness, and like you said, Dylan, he has a very strong understanding of how the world works, and he chooses to use that understanding to live a life of obscurity and free of conflict. It almost makes too much sense.
Well, that's the thing, because it's like he exemplifies so much of how I imagine Abercrombie thinks of if you had to be in a war. Like, the only thing that would make sense to do is to do it, if you actually saw it for what it is to do it the way Corporal Tunney does it. Is like, minimize your chance of getting killed, minimize your chance of the people around you getting killed, and just try to figure out how to scrape out an existence that is at least like somewhat enjoyable and sustains you without dying.
Yeah, and he does try and keep his crew alive. He's got a bunch of like rookies, basically. Very.
He cares about
people.
Yoke.
Yeah, he does, and he's trying to teach them like, here's how you survive a war. Step 1: never fight.
And there's this moment where he recounts all the Lord Marshals he's lived through. Yeah. And there's so many of them. And we get a West shout out in there.
We do.
And it's like all these people. So it's like someone like
Heroes
West,
all,
Colin
right?
West. Heroes all, exactly. Who like West lived fast. West crammed a lot of ambition and a lot of success into his short life.
Right.
And we saw that in the first Love Trilogy. We just recently did our West character profile.
We sure did.
And we were talking about how he takes initiative, how he chases what he wants, and he oftentimes gets it. And then he died.
Yeah.
He was first through the breach, and he was also out of there and died. Yeah. First, I don't have a fun pun or anything here, but I'm just saying that someone like that who was very ambitious chased it. Then he died. Before him, we had it. It was Lord Marshal Burr. And Burr probably had so much stress in his life that he had indigestion to the point of death. Exactly. So it's like these people who live fast, they die fast too. And Tunney has just been bouncing a little bit up, a little bit down, trying to stay at corporal as much as possible. And he survived them all. So it's hard to really get down on Tunney's way of doing things. He's lasting longer than all these Lord Marshals.
Right, and I think the fact that he's more of a fringe POV character and not one of the main ones only further exemplifies like who he is. Right, he's not he's not doing anything exciting because he's actively avoiding any kind of notoriety because he doesn't want targets on his back. He doesn't want the responsibility. He doesn't want the risk. It's not worth it. He's found the balance of risk and reward that could just have him live a peaceful life, and he's living it and he's passing it down. And I just thought, in a book that's the whole story is a 3-day battle on a hill, someone who's actively anti combat, it's a really interesting perspective in this crazy book on war. And his view of heroes is like, what, like, you can live a better life by avoiding anything heroic. Heroic stuff is dangerous, and you don't need it. I just love that line. Wars are hard enough work without people fighting in the middle of them. Yeah, it's like amazing. So that's Tunney for you. Great character. Another character that we may as well get through. Another one that I think is like a fringe character, but still very good, is Beck. Now, Beck is another. We talk about this thesis on heroism. Beck is the one that you see so many times in fantasy books. Young, humble beginnings, had this legendary father who was taken from him. He's hungry for war. He gets his big chance. He goes out. He leaves his mother behind. He's like, I have to do this. I have to chase the glory. He's been anticipating this his whole life. And he quickly finds out, as soon as the blood is shed, that he is a coward.
Or here's what I think, Charles, is like, he's a person.
Yes.
And because he talks to like Craw about this, and he's like, oh yeah, I pissed myself, and then I took credit kind of accidentally for all the killing that this other person did, and then I killed someone on my side. And Craw, who's been in the business for a long time, is kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, that's happened to all of us. Like,
it's so true.
And I'll toss it to you in a sec, Charles.
Sure, you got it.
But and so I think that the difference between Beck and these people who stick around is that the people who stick around are just like less aware of how messed up war is and what it's doing to them, and they put up with that stuff over and over again, and eventually they get desensitized to it. But I think Beck's experience is one that probably, based on like Craw's reaction, is one that a lot of people have. They just don't wise up the way that Beck did when Beck decides like, oh, this isn't for me. It's like, well, it's probably not for anyone to go around killing people, but other people tell themselves the story that it is. They want heroics. They want all this stuff. And Beck was like, I'm going to go back home to a place where I'm loved and know what to do, and like carve out a life that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going back to my mommy.
I don't think he's a coward. I think he's, I don't think he's a coward. I think he's a person.
Right. It wasn't cowardice.
Like, he's having a normal
end.
reaction.
And one of my most favorite scenes in this whole book is what you were mentioning, the conversation between Craw and Beck at the end. Yeah. Because Beck's story, he kind of falls into heroism unwittingly, right? He was like, oh, the stories aren't true. Like, I kind of just not even trying, just through accident, I became this big hero. And Craw's like, I've heard that story 1,000 times. He's like, that's everyone's story, really. It's you just kind of fall into these moments, and it's one of these additional, theses on heroism. I don't know what the plural of thesis is. Is it just thesis? Another thesis on heroism. Theses, thank you. I'm not crazy about that word.
It's the grad school. Yeah, it does sound like it does sound like feces, which you can choose what to do with your editing skills with the fact I said that. But yes, theses, Charles, word. Theses.
Yeah, so theses,
my grad school background.
Thank you. Yes, I only had one thesis at a time, but getting my bachelor's in business school.
That's fair. even with those 2 degrees. Charles?
Yes, one at a time. So thank you for bringing that in. We have theses. One of the many theses on heroism. That we get with Beck is like, even the great stories, there's a person behind them that thinks it's a farce. It's like sometimes it's just a farce, that it happens on a fluke. The person doesn't live up to the name, right? And we know he gets his name Red Beck, and it's almost an irony because he's and he just does not. He just can't sit with this waste of human life that he's been experiencing in combat. And when he has these moments with Craw, and he finally confesses, and Craw doesn't even bat an eye. He's like, yeah, because Beck thinks it's like, oh, if anyone found out, they'd put me in jail and it would be the end. And Craw's like, dude, it's war. That stuff happens all the time. You're just lucky enough to have survived it. And then Beck just takes that in and is like, I'm out of here. And his ending is he embraces his mom. He goes back home. And that's not typically the story that we
Yeah.
get from a hero. And Beck is Beck a hero? I'm not sure, but he is one of the few characters in the First Law world that is able to walk away from violence and scores. I mean, he's like the exact opposite of Logan, right? He's like, Logan would never go back to his home and be like, oh, I'm just going to put that, like, that was not fun, not for me. Like, I'm here now.
Logan killed his dad, so maybe that helps Beck learn some lessons.
Exactly.
The hard way.
So it's like Beck is one of the few people who's able to look at this scene around him and change his story. And it was a wholesome thing to see. And I really did appreciate that about Beck's storyline. And I love that Craw-Beck conversation at the end. Really, really well done.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, because it's like, I like to think that if I were in this kind of world that I would wise up enough to be like Beck and just be like, let's live a simple life with minimal violence. It's, like you said, Charles, he's one of the few characters in Joe Abercrombie's world to actually listen to all this advice that all the old hands are giving of like, hey, step away from this. Go be happy.
Right.
Go carve out a real life of not killing people. And Beck is like, yeah, I will do that. And good for you, Beck.
Right. And it's there's another like nice little detail of that giant legendary sword, and Beck is like, it's the legendary sword. Like, what isn't it supposed to be passed down? And Craw's like, bury it. It's not that important. It never did anything good for anybody, and who cares about its reputation? It's a thing we can just get rid of. And I just, all those.
You're talking about Wirren Bly's father of swords. Can we talk a little about Wirren at some point?
Let's do it. Wirren Bly.
No, Wirren Bly is such a great character. I think it's amazing how Abercrombie is able to just build this Wirren Bly like persona up so well. He's such a character. Stephen Pacey kind of uses almost a Casca-like sounding voice. I don't know if you noticed that for
it was kind of. It's like a little more rough around the edges, but yeah, for sure.
Right. And Wirren is such definitely some bravado, and he does this whole this whole thing where he's just this amazing legendary swordsman, but he's
unhinged.
Cracking up Wirren. He's a little unhinged. And he'll also follow the very, most of the time, reasonable and level-headed Kerndon Craw, because Wirren is convinced, based on some witch's prophecy, that Kerndon is the person who's going to show him his destiny.
I've been seeing the time and the manner of my death, and it is not here.
Yes, and that one led him awry.
Yes.
Because
he's like, I should have worn armor.
Yeah, yes, you should have, Wirren. Like, he has this amazing fight, and this is so Abercrombie, is that fight between Wirren and Gorst, where it's like, legendary fight. You've been building toward this in some ways, like pretty much the best fighter on the Union side against the best fighter on the North. You've been building toward this, and Abercrombie has the writing ability, the writing chops, of course, to deliver a ridiculously satisfying fight where one of them wins or something like that, and it's just clear who the better fighter was. But because he's Joe Abercrombie, he chooses to make it be like just a spear out of nowhere, takes Wirren with his bare chest because he's so convinced of this prophecy that he's not going to die in this battle. And Gorst is like disappointed. He got past it, but disappointed that he doesn't even get to really finish his fight and see who the better fighter was. Mm-hmm. And it's like, again, driving home that point of how, like, just because it's war or whatever, you don't get these dramatic, amazing, heroic moments. They're not guaranteed. You get pointless things and people dying when they didn't expect to, and not in ways that are as dramatic and, we'll say heroic again,
right,
and as they could be in stories. And it's such a beautifully Abercrombie twisted moment.
And it's interesting to see a character who's bought into the idea that they are a hero, and they have some of these legendary things about them, and they're like the crazy person. who dies a very preventable death. So it's like it's another one
true.
of those bitter ironies that Abercrombie can masterfully weave. And he's also the inventor of the sandwich, which I don't think people give him enough credit for that. He was putting cheese.
Did he call it like a cheese trap?
Yeah, a cheese trap.
Was that what he called? I'm trying to remember.
And then everyone else is like, sliced bread. It's like you take the bread and you take the cheese and you eat them. Like, what are you talking about combining them? So yeah, it's one of those funny moments. But yeah, a cheese trap. I think that is what he was calling it.
Is that what something like that?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Oh, so there you go. That's another one of the many heroes in this book. I think this is the last POV character that we have yet to talk about.
We didn't talk about, I think you're looking at Finry, right?
Yes.
We didn't really talk about Craw in detail yet.
No, we haven't talked about Craw. We've talked about him more than we've talked about Finry, but we haven't really given Craw his due either. Craw.
Which do you want to go for first?
Craw is like I feel like if there was going to be a main character of this book, he gets a lot of screen time. He's compared to Three Trees a lot, which is always a good thing, I guess. Like Three Trees, through and through, was a pretty decent guy, and everyone liked him, and he died a noble death. And one of the things that I'm getting a sense that, as we finish the heroes is times are changing, right? We've got cannons now, and battles are changing, and a character like Three Trees existed when Logan was talking to spirits and breathing fire. Those times are fading, not fast, but they're fading, and Craw's kind of on the fringe of that, and he's older, right? Retiring too, so he's the old hat at this as well. So it's interesting to see how Abercrombie's world is progressing and leaving some of these characters almost kind of behind, and Craw's feels like one of those ones who's getting a little bit left behind. He's not sure what to do. He's able to drop some really good wisdoms to people like Beck, and he makes the troops feel better, but there's
a great conversation with Shivers that I'll read at.
Shivers is a whole nother character we can talk about. But Craw he's often giving speeches to people and making them feel better, but he's giving speeches that he doesn't personally believe in. He's like, oh, that eulogy was crap and this guy wasn't that great. But everyone was like, you did a great job, Calder. You did a great job, Craw. Straight edge, all through and through, like Three Trees. Yeah. And he's like, whatever.
Oh my God. So we have this awesome conversation between Shivers and Craw, and it starts with kind of this, how do you be a good person? And we know that Shivers really wants to be a good person from his Best Served Cold days when he tried really hard at the beginning of Best Served Cold, and didn't work out for him. But he's talking to Craw, so how do you do the good man thing? He's like, why I tried it, couldn't make it root, couldn't see the profit in it. And Craw responds with, there's your problem. Anything good I've done, and the dead know there ain't much, I've done for its own sake. Gotta do it because you want to. And Shivers says, I'm going to blank something out for the clean podcast here, but Shivers says, it ain't no kind of sacrifice if you want to do it, though, is it? How does doing what you want make you an effing hero? That's just what I do. And Craw says, I haven't got the answers. Wish I did. And then we get Shivers. It says Shivers turned the ring on his little finger thoughtfully round and round. And we know that is Benna's ring. And I was talking about this in the Best Served Cold episode about how the ring is kind of this metaphor for this vengeance and seeking blood and all this kind of stuff. And we've got Shivers turning on his hand here. And it says, redstone glistening. And Shivers says, guess it's just about getting through each day. Craw says, those are the times. Shiver says, you think other times will be any different? And Craw says, we can hope. And it's such a wise... I just love Craw's wisdom because he's seen so much. And he's just been grinding to try to do good things. And he still sees all the ways he messes up. And he deals with people being like, how do you do the good person thing? He's like, I don't know. I just try really hard, and then everyone tells me I'm doing well, but I feel like I'm just doing crappy. All I do is hope and try. And Shivers, he's trying to take it in, and he does get a moment there at the end where, Black Dow, he's got all these issues and stuff like that, and maybe it came a little bit from a place for Shivers of not wanting to be a dog anymore and being betrayed and knowing that maybe he'll get treated better by Calder, but he also kills the person who a lot of people would say is the worst person in the entire North and puts a person who's been preaching for peace in charge. So we'll see. I mean, it's still Shivers killing a person, but...
and cheating in a contest and all these other things, but... It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
That's the least of it.
Maybe he's learned. Yeah. And that's kind of the Craw thing, too, is like, I do things all the time that get people killed, and everyone keeps telling me I'm a good person. What is going on here?
Yeah.
So...
he's got a bit of an imposter syndrome thing going on, which, again, is this part of this duality of heroism, right? Where it's like, oh, everyone really likes me and thinks I'm great and compares me to Three Trees, calls me a straight edge, but... I lead men to die all the time. I failed almost everyone that was part of my original band, including like the most heroic hero of the North is dead. So it's and I give crap eulogies. So it's like it's to him it's nothing, and to everyone else it's a big deal. So it's again this idea of heroism, and you bring up such a great point with Shivers and the ring, and like I was thinking when I was reading this, there's so many moments where people are like, you can read the standalones and get 90% of it, and you can give it a try. And I kind of said when we read Best Served Cold, like, yeah, you can, and I'm kind of stepping back on that a little bit, because it's like, you should definitely read these in publication order. Like, there's no reason to just read Best Served Cold or read the heroes to me. Now, like, especially, I believe that even more after reading the heroes, because I'm like, you have to have read the other books to understand what's going on here. The amount of perspective that you get from reading the other books when you go into the heroes is insane. Black Dow, Baez, Shivers, Gorst, like, more so than Best Served Cold, to be fair, but even Best Served Cold with Shivers and Jazal, it's like to see what Joe Abercrombie is doing, and he's doing more and more of it in the heroes. We get so many more character visits, and this world is changing, and the way that unsympathetic characters are sympathetic now, and vice versa. It's the real experience. There's like another experience going on beyond the entertaining story that we're getting, that it's understated, but it's super like complex and fascinating from like a world building perspective. And it's an experience you cannot sell yourself short on, I think.
Well, yeah. If people want to read the standalones and they want to go right into it, then, more power to
read
them.
What you want to read, but I'll never recommend it.
I've always felt... That is fair, Joe. I've always felt that there's a whole nother level to the experience, like you're discussing, and that happens from just this moment. Like, that Shivers is one of the best characters for it, because, I won't say beyond this or anything like that, but he's been in every book since he first appeared. He was in Best Served Cold, and then he's in this one, and he's been like growing and changing and learning and unlearning and all this stuff the whole time. And a moment as subtle as like he's turning a ring, and if you're reading the heroes as just a standalone, the turning of the ring means absolutely nothing to you. There's no way it could mean anything to you
beyond the fact
like
that he's like contemplating something.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like, Shivers is thinking.
Best Served, yes. And if you've read Best Served Cold and you are still thinking about Bena Mercato's ring, then it means a whole nother level
even just
of something.
The question, like,
gesture.
How are you a better man? Like, Shivers asking that.
Yes.
You having read Best Served Cold, you're like, oh my gosh, I know why he's asking that, because that was his whole purpose in Best Served Cold, that he abandoned completely. And he sees it in Craw, and there's almost like this glimmer of a past version of Shivers coming through in these moments, right? It's this level of characterization that goes beyond the dialogue, and it's so fascinating, and it's a huge experience in this book, and you see more and more of it in the heroes than we did in Best Served Cold, and it's super fascinating. Like, I haven't considered Abercrombie as like creating this vast world and universe, but he's up there with any other big epic fantasy author, and it's just a different way of doing it with it through restraint and through POVs and through time and change. It's like, wow, time and change. This is so bold things to do. Yeah, like his characters change, his world is changing fast.
Yes, yeah. You keep going to world building, and I see what you're getting at, especially, like cannons and sandwiches are being invented. And
industrialization is happening, or beginning to happen.
It is happening, but and credit to Abercrombie for that. But it all is just a stage for him to tell stories about these characters and their evolution, and that's. Yeah, so really what it is characters changing and the world changes around them, but characters are the thing that gets a spotlight shine on them. And I'll say, Charles, one character that we get to see influenced and change as, from the First Law trilogy and how they show up now is Croy. Croy, who is someone who was like a bickering bozo in the First Law trilogy that West had to deal with. And now he's this like Lord Marshal who has seen the person he used to bicker with, because he got that very interesting moment at the end of the First Law trilogy where Polder, who he's bickered with this whole time, dies. And Croy's kind of like, wait, if I don't have Polder to rage against, what am I? And you can see that he's taken all this time to reflect and be like, I was such a bozo in my youth. I'm going to do better now. And he enters this book as this like hardened, strong leader. And so I'm really impressed by that. And I really enjoy Finry is actually one of my favorite point of views in this book. I think that's probably going to be a whole nother, I don't know. We'll see if people agree with me or not. Hopefully they agree that she's one of my favorites, because that's but yeah, so we'll see if other people like her that much. But yeah, her relationship with Croy and how Croy has become this like strong father figure despite being a bozo earlier on. And we'll get into Finry more about
right. And I mean, he basically in his own way stood up to Baez, which is one of the most admirable things you can do in the First Law universe is like somehow defy Baez and walk away with your life and your dignity intact. Like only a few people are able to do that. And it seems like we don't really get to see the fallout, but it seems like Calder got away with it a little bit too. But it was a close one.
Croy. Oh, you're saying Calder.
Yeah, Calder, like because he made his brother king, right? Instead of killing him like Baez wanted. But what's really interesting is that Croy was able to like try and avoid this horrible violence and then resign. And then Baez was like, yeah, you'd have to resign because you're not doing what I tell you to. So it's a moment of endearment for Croy, I think. And to think of him as like one of those bureaucratic, squabbly guys who held up the charge to the North because he couldn't get over his petty bickerings. What like you said, the growth is fantastic, and it's not even a POV character or ever a main character or anything. It's a character that's just existed in this world for so long that it's
you got all excited.
Yeah, I know. I knocked over stuff on my desk. It was my excitement for Croy, which I never thought I was going to have. If you had told me I had excitement for Croy after Last Argument of Kings, I'd be like, okay, what about all these other characters?
Yeah.
So yes, it's true. It's great.
Yeah, and you get to see how he helped shape his daughter, who's like, she's an interesting character, this young, clever, ambitious, but privileged a woman growing up on with this military stuff around her, and she's just kind of she's a woman in a world where it's still, I mean, it's extremely patriarchal. So basically, she's like, the best I can hope for is to find a heroic seeming dude who I can use my wits to try to elevate. And she really sets to it. And she's one of those characters, Charles, that I appreciate her. She initiative, and she's very proactive, and she also is very clever. She even catches the eye of Baez for being an ambitious, clever person.
And you know she's Baez, clever when she sees Baez and is like, that guy's no good. And every character that's ever been able to see through Baez has always been a bit more clever, certainly. So it's interesting to see. Here's another character who sees right through him and his facade. So you got to give her points for that. There's also this idea of, it's kind of an interesting idea about traditional heroism and the fact that she's trying to advance her husband, who's pretty much a buffoon, but just he was born into
nice
guy, but no ambition and doesn't know how to play the game, doesn't know how to politic, and he's just kind of content in his station, and his idea is like, oh, I have to be dutiful to my superior and all this. It's like, no, you got to go like above his head, talk to this person, and do all these things. And Baez is like, that's kind of what I do through like Jazal, and it's what Calder does through his brother. It's like we let the title and the station go to someone else so that we can do our own thing, you know, and not have the target on our back.
Beautifully stated. Yes, beautifully stated. And the only person who might have a chance at stating it even better than you, Charles, would be Baez himself.
Oh, let's hear
Joe Abercrombie, who says, heroes have their uses, but someone has to point them the right way and clean up afterwards. They always raise a cheer from the public, but they leave a hell of a mess. And he says that to Finnery.
So
Baez has this moment with Finnery. It's like, let me take you under my wing. Like, I can see that you're kind of like me, which is kind of insulting. But it also, at Finnery, I also think part of what I like about her is like, she feels so bad about... She actually has a very heroic moment where she stands up to Black Dow, she saves all these people, and she still feels terrible about the one person she left behind to a really horrible fate. So she has a lot more care in her heart than Baez does. I know that's setting the bar pretty low if we're going Baez, but I really do like Finnery because, we get this external, venomously ambitious type thing, and she tells herself a story about that, and then meanwhile, when push comes to shove, she tries to save as many people as she possibly can. So, big fan of Finnery, and I enjoy her as a character. It's kind of that, like, she gives some like arty vibes, but at least we get a point of view, like, and she's in a more it's like clever woman who's trying to find her way in a man's world, but she has a lot more privilege.
And she's able to like go against Baez without being like stupid fool. She's able to be like, oh well, I don't really trust you. She's able to speak the language. Exactly right. And I love that quote that you dropped, because it's just yet another one of the endless different like theses on heroism. It's this idea like heroes have uses. This idea that like, heroes, we see heroes as like the center of the story, the big deal, but it's like they can be useful as tools, but you gotta be able to work around them. And bringing Baez and Finnery together is such an interesting choice by Joe Abercrombie, and it hits that home so well. Like, who else but the master puppeteer himself, who does this, who operates like this all the time through Valen and Bach, through Glocta, through everybody. And to have Finnery kind of learn these lessons under this guise of the heroes and using heroes to obtain power is super fascinating. And it's in Finnery's case, it's with her own husband and the Brock family as well, which is an interesting little piece of world building there too. We remember the Brocks from when Jazal was elected king. Brock was going to be the king, and until Baez weave this heroic story together. Jazal the hero. He like he's squashed the rebellion and like saved this bridge and went on this epic quest and he's he's like the bastard son of the king. Let's all vote for him. And so Brock had to flee in disgrace. And so it's really interesting to see the name Brock pop back up and somehow able to turn that into some notoriety.
Well said. As always, Charles. Yes, I love it. It's the kind of thing. And then you see Baez come back around and be like, now the Brocks have use for me in this way. So I can elevate you and you can be, right, like Lord Governor of England. Is that accurate where they end up? England or
something like that.
Yeah, whatever. They get to be, let's see if I can...
Lord Governor of England. Yes, I confirm.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
You got it, man. You got it.
Right. It's like, so we get to see how manipulative Baez is and how much of an opportunist he is, where he's like, oh, yeah, of course I will destroy the Brock family when need be. But then as soon as I note someone like Finrey, who can speak my language and can put the hero in their place while controlling them, it's basically he's like, oh, this is a great opportunity to create a like Finrey in the Glocta role and Brock in the Jazal role, just on a mini level. So he jumps at it. That's how much of and he's just going around doing that. But he also,
Finrey also gets a little bit of, character development, but in the wrong way, where she kind of has to bend the knee a little bit to Baez, even though she doesn't like him. Baez is like, hey, I can give this to you, or I can give this to someone else. I don't really care. Do you want it or not? Like, you've kind of entertained me during these past 3 days, but, I'm Baez, so I will forget you exist tomorrow.
Yes.
Do you want this or not? And she... he's kind of threatening when he says all these things, as he is, and she kind of bends the knee a little bit and placates him a bit to get this role. And he's like, it's not so bad. I mean, come on. Like, I have a lot to offer here. Yes, I'm a bit threatening right now, but you have so much to gain. And so she agrees to those terms. So, getting in bed with Baez is kind of a dangerous game, but, she's up for it. So it's interesting in that way, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she gets what she wanted, and this is, in reality, or the reality of Joe Abercrombie's world, this is what getting power looks like. Everybody has to serve someone. And we get people like Monza who are very much resisting it, but it's very hard to escape.
You get people like Beck and Tunney who just don't even bother playing.
Right. And you can make the case that's way better, but if Finrey wants this stuff. So that's part of what I like about her character. She's ambitious and she knows, hey, yeah, this is risky, but let's go for it. And yeah, it's an interesting moment. I don't want to say too much more but
the implications, what's to
who
come,
knows?
maybe?
Who knows? Who knows? It could be anything. It could be nothing. But
I mean, I have started reading Red Country, and it's my first read through, and I haven't read anything beyond. So I have a little glimpse into the future of potential spoilers, but not much. And Dylan, you've read everything, so you know it all at this point.
I'm just trying to zip my mouth over here. So
I hear you.
One more thing on Finrey, the Gorst and Finrey.
Oh yeah, where she just
situation.
Him. Yeah. At the
she
end.
does skewer him. I don't know how most people read this thing, if they're like rooting for Gorst and Finrey to get together or what. I obviously was like Finrey, this is the correct approach to take here.
I wasn't hoping
like this guy
got together.
Yeah. Like,
I was hoping Gorst would get over it.
That was a good hope.
But something else happened instead. I guess he did get over it, but not through personal growth.
He put himself out there, and Finrey did exactly what is like the sensible, rational thing to do, which is like, I am currently married to a guy who is going to be the Lord Governor of England. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be Lord Governess and really run it. Like, please go away. You're a murderer. And You know, I mean, it wasn't that much nicer than that, honestly. Right. But she did what makes sense for her. It's kind of this, like, we're very used to these arcs of, like, if a character's in love with another character, then they're going to get together. Mm-hmm. Gorst had so much crap going on for him that it's probably hard. I don't know if any people, like, root for that relationship to work out or what. I'm sure some people do. And it's normal. That's the way to read. That's a normal way to read someone being in love with someone, is that you're in their point of view to, like, want them to fall in love. But I just love this, like, I don't think it's an intentional subversion of that necessarily, but just this, like, honest moment of Finri being like, no, why would I want to be with you?
Right.
And I appreciate that.
Me too. And it immediately follows the scene where Gorst gets this, he's been agonizing over the fact that he was cheated out of his position, right? And he gets the position back, and he doesn't have it for an hour before he meets with Finri, and just is like, you got your position back, but you're a horrible person and you're a joke. Like, I used to think you were like a noble guy, but your intentions are so clear now, and it's transparent and pathetic. And she leaves, and he's like, I don't even know how to feel anymore. And that's how his plot basically ends.
Yeah, of course. And we also get the reveal with Gorst that's like, he's like, I was a scapegoat this whole time, and it's like, you did mess up your job. Like,
you were high, like you messed up.
Yeah, you were supposed to protect the king, and you didn't. So
it was your fault. Like, you weren't a scapegoat as much as it was your own fault. So but he gets the job, he gets the position back. So it is what it is.
It is what it is.
And man, did we do it all here? We covered every POV character somewhat. We covered a lot of the story. I mean, again, there's more of this stuff like Ishri's in the mix, and there's gunpowder in the mix, and there's this thing of like magic fading and technology advancing, which is interesting, but it's secondary to what we've been discussing, which is character and all of the different theses on heroism.
Right. Well, I mean, we did an hour, almost 20-minute episode, and spent the whole thing talking about character. If we tried to get nitty-gritty with every single plot thing, then it's probably a disservice to the thing that I think Joe Abercrombie would say he cares the most about.
I mean, he very deliberately kept the plot super simple, the setting super simple, and it was deliberate, almost kind of like the farce of all these heroic tales is the fact that it was told over 3 days on the dingy little hill, right? Yeah. It's like almost another piece of this puzzle of this farce of war and heroism is like, but it was only 3 days, and it was over a useless scrap of land, but it was where they needed to be because this is where the North and the Union were settling their differences. So it's like the fact that it's inconsequential is actually super important and brilliant, honestly, as far as storytelling goes.
Totally agree, Charles. Well said.
And I'm looking forward to more. I've already, like I said, cracked the cover on Red Country, and I can see where it's going. I'm very excited to talk about it. Dylan and I have never exchanged thoughts on Red Country either, so that will be exciting. And I know, Dylan, you've gone to say Red Country is your favorite of the standalones.
Okay. But we ran a poll recently on Twitter.
It did abysmal.
So I put it like, which is your favorite Joe Abercrombie standalone? And I did put an option of like, haven't read any. So like 40% of the people that voted hadn't read any of the standalone books, which is fair. So take that out of the equation. And then of the remaining the remaining votes, Red Country only got 6% of
That's rough.
Like 6% of the total vote. And then we had a tie. And there were like over 100 votes or something, and we had a tie, like an exact tie, like 27% each, I think, for Best Served Cold and the Heroes. So Red Country, and I said on my personal account, I was like, Red Country is before I knew this was going to happen in the vote. You know, I was like, I think this is going to be a little controversial or whatever, but Red Country is my favorite. And people were like, yeah, that's a weird take. But I love Red Country.
I'll have to weigh in after the next episode. I'll weigh in. But for now, I don't know, man. The Heroes impressed me quite a bit. We didn't even talk about casualties. I mean, alluded to it
We'll
multiple
talk about
times.
it in the point of view episode.
Or maybe just like, the point of view episode, it could even have a whole conversation just on casualties. But we recognize it, and we did talk about it a little bit, and incredible use of POVs. But you're right, we will have a whole POV discussion because there's so much to be said. But for now, everybody, we've done it. We've discussed the heroes. I love talking these characters. So much fun. And I'm looking forward to Red Country. Our book discussion on that is coming out very soon. It's the next book discussion we're dropping, so very exciting stuff. And then, it's onto the Age of Madness. I'm so excited.
Yes. Well, let me first say I'm so happy we got to have the heroes talk, because I've been holding in my thoughts for so long, and I'm just pumped to be able to chat with my buddy and lifelong friend and co-host and all stuff about an amazing book and such amazing military fantasy, all this kind of stuff. So that's awesome. Red Country up next, my favorite of the standalones. Can't wait to have the first conversation on air ever. That's a cool thing, right? Is we save it till the episode, so you get to see us experiencing that. So Red Country, yes, pumped. And then Age of Madness, literally, those are my two favorite Abercrombie books, and I
can't wait.
Feeling that the third book, The Wisdom of Crowds, if the trend continues, will be my favorite ever. So, and Abercrombie, I have every confidence he's going to deliver on the end of that trilogy. It's just going to be so much fun, Charles. You've got a real adventure.
It's going to be super exciting when that comes out and we're reading it right at release with everyone else in the world. It's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, guys, thank you so much for listening. And I think we're ready to get that outro music going.
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles. This has been awesome.
Yes, this has been a fantastic time. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you're a Joe Abercrombie fan, if you think Red Country is the best of the standalones, let us know over on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end, or over on Instagram as well at the FTF Podcast. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than social media, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page. Scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click in order to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time, you want to go that next step of supporting the show, then writing a review is super helpful for a podcast like ours. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Just listening, guys. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.